to me, I think what I find more shocking is that in the last 30 years, I have witnessed Western societies, the Netherlands, Britain, the United States of America, forces emerging from within, either subscribing to communism or who come from Muslim countries and establishing Islamism here and saying, let's deconstruct this Western civilization that is centered around.
A woman who survived forced marriage, communism and Islamism in the same lifetime sits down at ARC 2026 and delivers a warning most Western media houses are too polite to say out loud. It is a frightening breakdown of everything wrong with European countries.
Ayaan, so I was thinking, you've experienced two of the greatest human inventions ever, communism and Islamism. And you came to the West and you saw something different. In a very practical sense, what did you see that struck you?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I think I couldn't be more delighted to be in the company of everyone here at ARC. The first thing that struck me was girls and women on the streets. I was struck by, there was just so much plenty. To give you a timeline, this was in July of 1992 when I first came. And I came from a place where it was my family, my father, who had decided to arrange a marriage for me, or actually force me into a marriage. And that's how the family was how the family was formed. And our families were polygamous. So coming into the West, the idea that the young women I met could choose their own person that they loved and that they could form their own families freely, I thought that was astounding. As I lived in the...
Let's get into it. The opening segment is deceptively simple. What actually struck her, in a practical sense, moving from two of history's most brutal ideologies into the West? The answer isn't regulations, it's people. It's women walking freely on the street, a level of everyday abundance that reads as almost surreal against where she'd come from. Coming from a forced marriage, arranged by her own father, watching young Dutch women choose their own partners felt less like culture shock and more like discovering gravity worked differently here.
I became acquainted with the concept of church or religion, and people would worship God freely, and if they didn't want to worship, they didn't worship. I didn't have that choice growing up. I had to worship, and my relationship with God was centered around fear. Schools, again, very impressed with the concept that school was really for imparting knowledge and forming character. In both communism and Islamism, school really was for indoctrinating children, really stealing, kidnapping other people's children and then indoctrinating them. I remember I was a translator, interpreter, and I remember translating for,
Just when it sounds like this is purely a story about personal freedom, it pivots into something very unsettling.
One of them was a school, and the Somali child had beaten the Dutch child, and the Dutch teacher was trying to explain to the Somali mother, your child cannot do this. And she said, but I did say to him, hit him if he teases you or if some child bothers you. And that for me put on a crucible the country and the societies that I came from, where you use brutal strength, violence, to stop someone else from being violent. And the Dutch teacher explained and said there are other ways of doing things. To move very quickly, small businesses, people sold and bought things and freely, and again, I know there were lots of complaints in the Netherlands about not just the existence of small businesses, but how they do. But I just remember the little shops, the little kiosks that we had in Mogadishu, in Ethiopia, everywhere where I was, they lived in terror of the state. People would come and take their stock. If their goods were stolen, you didn't call a policeman, because a policeman was not someone you trusted. He represented the state, and that was someone you feared. And I thought it was astonishing for me living in the Netherlands to find policemen that you called for help, who actually helped you. And I can go on. The universities, again, produced graduates who actually did things that were useful. The media, journalists reported on the government and were not a propaganda machine trying to push down all sorts of untruths down your throat.
It's a small story, but it's doing a lot of heavy lifting because it draws a straight line between two entirely different theories of how you're supposed to handle conflict, brute force versus institutional trust. And here's where it gets even more unbelievable, because the same theme keeps stacking. Police you could actually call for help instead of fear. Small businesses that operated without living in terror of the state confiscating everything overnight.
It goes. To me, I think what I find more shocking is that in the last 30 years, I have witnessed Western societies, the Netherlands, Britain, the United States of America, forces emerging from within, either subscribing to communism or who come from Muslim countries and establishing Islamism here and saying, let's deconstruct this Western civilization that is centered around every single institution, at least when I came, on paper, was committed to individual well-being. And the Islamists among us, and the communists among us are saying, let's shift all these institutions away from this focus on the individual towards the collective. And the result, to be quite clear, is just going to be where I came from.
Well, that's quite terrifying. And you make the point about the police is so interesting because coming from the Soviet Union and the 1990s Russia, I remember being somewhere in Eastern Europe with some Russian friends, and I, being British effectively at this point, we were looking for directions to get somewhere. And I was like, oh, there's a police officer, let's... And they literally grabbed me by the arm and go, don't talk to the police officer because it's dangerous in places like the one you came from. And of course, as you point out, we now have a conversation about policing in this country and whether it's fair and whether everyone is treated equally. How do we navigate this and avoid the terrible prediction that you're making, which is we're moving in that direction?
The last 30 years, according to Ayaan, have shown Western nations quietly importing the same forces she escaped, communism and Islamism both, now working from inside the very institutions that were supposed to protect individual life. And what's genuinely chilling about her narration isn't the accusation itself, it's the conclusion attached to it. If the West keeps shifting away from the individual toward the collective, the destination isn't some new utopia, it's just a rerun of exactly where she came from. Now this is where the tone shifts from a grateful immigrant story to full-blown alarm.
I think it's what this conference is about, which is we can explain the deconstruction that's been happening in the last few decades, and now it is time to reconstruct all of these institutions back to focusing on the individual well-being and brick by brick and piece by piece rebuild, I would say, all of these institutions. Do not give in to the demands of Islamists. Confront them with the question, why are you here if Sharia law is so fantastic? Why are so many people in Muslim countries moving to the infidel West? And the same, again, this up-and-coming ideas, it's much more prominent in New York, the democratic socialists, and I know that they're here, the Fabian societies, but there's this idealist, romantic story that if only communism was done one more time, this time differently, it's going to yield something else. It will not. It is going to yield the exact same thing as it yields everywhere from Mogadishu to Caracas to the Soviet Union, as you remember. Lots of dead people, starvation, hunger. There is no alternative to what the Christian Western civilization has built. It is...
It's interesting you say there's no alternative, and the question I wonder, you have kids, I have younger children than you, but your kids didn't go through the experiences that you went through. And I think one of the things we are seeing in the West is the things that you describe, they're so baked into our way of thinking that we think, well, if we just did communism, all those things would remain as they are. Yeah. Or if we just did something else, all those things would remain as they are because it's the water we swim in. How do we persuade children who haven't had your experiences, who don't have my family background, to consider that actually the things that they're doing, and in terms of messing with what we have, will create outcomes they haven't even considered, like the ones you've experienced?
Konstantin Kisin chimes in here with his own version of the same lesson, recalling being physically pulled away from a police officer in Eastern Europe by friends who still carried Soviet-era instincts. Two completely different backgrounds, landing on the exact same observation. How trustworthy institutions aren't just background noise, but the whole scaffolding holding a functioning society together. But that was just the setup, because the reconstruction pitch that follows is where things actually get combative.
My own children, on a very micro level, I make sure that they have a choice and that they see. I tell them about my life and I show it to them, and they know. And sometimes I think that they find it so, and my 14-year-old finds my life as a 14-year-old so unfathomable, as if I am from a different planet. And I think it's very easy when you live in the West and you breathe liberty, that you can get yourself into this delusional state of believing that there is some utopia out there. So again, there is no alternative to showing and telling. And what we've seen in the deconstruction period is all this censorship, the self-censorship, the political correctness, the pretense that there are other systems and other ways of doing things and other gods that are better than what you already have. There is no alternative. The one thing I love about the West is that we engage in self-reflection. We write these autopsies about why we failed. And if we are honest about why we get things wrong, we can get them right. When I lived in Somalia and in Saudi Arabia and in Ethiopia and all of these places, and we sat down and we asked ourselves, why is life so terrible? What are we getting wrong? We used to scapegoat freely. It's the Jews who did it. It's the Westerners who did it. Something was always happening to us as a collective. We never took individual responsibility because we weren't allowed to be individuals. Here you have a society that nurtures the individual, and you become an individual, you become responsible, you are held accountable, and we've built institutions that are geared towards this. And I think that it's time now to rescue our institutions from these bad ideas.
In her view, the government should confront Islamists directly. If Sharia law is genuinely the superior system, why are so many people fleeing Muslim-majority countries for the infidel West in the first place? That's not a rhetorical flourish. It's a question people rarely get asked to answer honestly on camera. And when the conversation pivots to democratic socialism gaining traction among younger Westerners, her response doesn't soften either. Communism has never once produced a different outcome anywhere it's been tried. Only different flags flying over the same graveyards.
And what do you say to people who say actually it's the pursuit of individual well-being that has given us the problems that you and I spend so much time talking about, that it's the overfocus on the narcissism of small differences, the individual. I said this morning that, liberalism has gone from the pursuit of freedom from tyranny to the pursuit of freedom from reality. And we see that everywhere. What do you say to the people who say, well, you can't separate liberty from these crazy extreme outcomes?
Yeah, I think that is a caricature of the system. And it is true that individualism can lead to extreme selfishness and narcissism. But again, the Christian story, the Western civilizational story, has the remedy for that. It is built into the system. There was someone, I'm blanking on his name right now, but who did write about once upon a time we used to fear God, and now we've come to fear, and fill in the blanks. And I think to go back to that fear of God, we were checked by these biblical truths. We were checked by, into every institution, some form of accountability was built into it. And what we did was remove these layers of accountability by labeling them white supremacist structures that had to go, and slowly shifted towards...
You're my favorite white supremacist, by the way.
They've been calling me white supremacist for a long time.
I know.
But if accountability is white supremacy, and if individual responsibility is white supremacy, then I want to be a white supremacist. But obviously that's not what it is. It is all these accusations, these blithe, superficial accusations, have been found to be effective. They work on you. And if you respond to it, then it becomes easy to smuggle in these bad ideas, and you can have no push.
The white supremacist joke landed exactly as intended. A jab at how quickly accountability itself gets rebranded as bigotry the moment it becomes inconvenient. But what follows isn't a punchline. It's the thesis of the entire interview. Strip away the mechanisms that hold institutions accountable, and you don't get liberation. You get exactly the collapse she spent her whole adult life trying to warn people about. And then comes the number nobody in that room was fully braced for.
The self-criticism, the critical thinking, the self-reflection, the accountability, the responsibility, these are the pillars that made the West different. And I think any time you make the unit of well-being, you shift it away from the individual to the group, you are going to have problems, and we are seeing them today. I came to this society, I could walk day and night freely, bicycle about 24 hours a day if I wanted to, wearing whatever I wanted to, and now a few decades on, we're in a place where women are afraid to go out, where we have rape gangs. There's a report out, 250,000 approximately young women in Britain have been abused by groups, and somehow we let it happen. It is not possible anymore now for any Western European leader to go to any part of the third world and lecture them about human rights with atrocities like that taking place here.
It's worth being honest here. 250,000 women, that specific figure comes from a contested independent report. And even critics of the number don't dispute that the underlying scandal, organised abuse across dozens of UK towns, decades of institutional failure, is very real. Numbers aside, her closing point doesn't need inflation to land. No Western leader can credibly lecture the developing world on human rights while something like that has been allowed to happen at home. Here's the part that stuck most, and it wasn't even the headline statistic. It was the smaller confession buried earlier, that her own 14-year-old finds her mother's teenage years so foreign. It's like hearing about life on another planet. That's not a throwaway line. It's the entire warning compressed into one sentence. Comfort has a way of erasing the memory of what it cost to get here, and every generation that forgets starts the countdown over again from zero. So here's what's actually worth sitting with. If the very safety and freedom the West built are what's making people forget why those things needed building in the first place, is comfort slowly becoming the thing that unravels civilization from the inside, one generation of forgetting at a time?